Hello, everyone. I'm excited to be the last presenter of ChaosCon 2020, and I've also got the pressure. I can't promise I'll bring everything together, but the content across this year's conf was fantastic, and we had some amazing speakers. The good news about my talk is it emphasizes culture, and we cover much of the same ground. It's not exactly a formula, but I will speak to what has worked for me as I've grown a small to now fairly large organization that has a strong culture that I believe in resiliency. So let's get started. First off, enterprise. So Charter Communications is the company I work for, and as you may or may not know, it's a very large company, and there are some very nuanced and large things that are involved in working in an enterprise and trying to develop software. With enterprise resources, there's enterprise responsibility, and that is inherently where that speed of innovation versus the stability of the core struggle comes in. As you're trying to develop software, inherently you've got to pass through a number of systems. Greenfield is almost not a thing in the enterprise. You're almost always working with some semblance of legacy systems and other systems that must be incorporated. And the challenge, one of the main challenges in that, is that many of these systems are operated and iterated on, in some cases, by different departments that are of multi-disciplines, so many different types of personalities and cultures. And ultimately, that means that there's a risk management strategy conflict as well, as in order to actually continue to deploy software, you've got to manage your risk. And operating the core, same thing. Any change, whether it's a small upgrade, there's inherent risk there. One of the strategies to try to address this is goal alignment across departments. Problem with that is it's subject to interpretation down to the management level, and even the individual engineers responsible for actually achieving them. The other, very obvious and often cliche, there's just lots of red tape, approvals, justifications, review boards, contingencies, goals. All of this kind of surrounds the enterprise, and in many cases can slow down innovation. So what often happens is we find ways in the enterprise to work together by working apart. So there, as I mentioned, multi-disciplines in different organizations, and they're all kind of built around how to leverage their individual skills and philosophies. And then the interconnections are really where things get sticky and tricky. Next up. All right, releases. So when it comes to actually getting your software across the line into a customer's hand, as I mentioned, really legacy is everywhere, and an enterprise, especially one that's been around for 10 plus years, that's also undergone a lot of acquisitions. You've got legacy debt from systems that your team almost certainly does not understand, and then outside of your team, you've got that same multidisciplinary balancing act to try to contend with and find kind of the path forward that works for everyone. So it often means long cycles, with a lot of risk management, kind of studies, strategies, and ultimately just trying to come to a common path where the minimum kind of risk is achieved. Ultimately, what my team and really any sort of burgeoning software development team wants is CI/CD. But that is super hard in an enterprise. That legacy debt and all that red tape could be very challenging to kind of corral in a very constructive way. So one way to do that is to just chip away at it slowly, automate everything, build great relationships with those teams that rely on your software or you rely on theirs. So one of the things that really emerged in my career and at Charter specifically is my team started small. I was able to bring a lot of my past experiences around running operations and DevOps and SRE teams to Charter, and I was able to start and get my kind of roots planted. And within the last year, we underwent a reorg. So it was essentially, I look at that as the opportunity for executives to instill the direction they would like to see organizations go. So they change from a top-down approach. And what it really does is ultimately tests the cultures. It tested my team's culture through this merge where ultimately we had an exponential growth from 30 to 120 people. So quick introductions. Charter Communications is a connectivity services company, 30 million customers, cable, internet, voice, mobile, Fortune 100, 95,000 employees. And that is our footprint map. I am Vice President of Data Platforms, so my team encompasses many different just kind of strategies for accessing data in a consistent manner. I think it's a kind of popular term for abstracting away integrations, and I'll talk some more about that in the coming slides. So the data platforms team is the backbone of much of what enables the business to operate in a modern fashion. And what I mean by that is really that decisions, roadmaps are ultimately driven by data and not always or ultimately on the gut instincts or opinions of those in charge. They are receiving input, they are getting feedback through the many chains of analytics, and the teams responsible for kind of assembling them. And the data platforms team is the one that is unifying a lot of those disparate threads that are pulling things together across many different departments. And our core responsibility is to kind of provide a consolidated view of that data to those who need it, often executives, and often even more so since the reorg, customers directly. And one important point is that this is an integration is not necessarily a systems thing. It's also a team. You've got to deal with the teams that are either the source or destination for that data conduit. So unification, develop and operate, really for reliability. The best data platforms to actually use are ones that are reliable, predictable, and boring, frankly. It's easy to get access, doesn't take a lot of work. It's easy to make requests, to make augmentations, to request new features, anything of that nature. And so bringing a reliable platform with the ability to be flexible is the core kind of our team. And one of the ways to do that, or really the only way to be reliable, is to have excellent operating habits. And the only way to do that is through shared pain. And I really believe that if you build it, you operate it, and you're going to feel that pain. That sort of legacy, departmental separation or divide between operations and development is very challenging to instill good habits around getting right back to the developer, so that up front, while you're writing the code, while you're developing it, during the life cycle, before it hits a customer, you've got resiliency top of mind. So a culture of reliability, and I think that is the crux of how you actually enable a team to have that mindset of developing for reliability through operations excellence. And I think I've developed a formula and a faith of sorts that culminates a lot of what makes a resilient culture work. So a formula, first of all, is more of a set of actions, and a faith is more of a set of beliefs. So the actions, the formula, demonstrate transparency, earn trust, gain management support, being very transparent around SLOs, honestly assessing compliance, over communicating issues in a relevant fashion are key to demonstrating transparency. Trust will come, it'll come. However, it is very difficult to keep. If you're not consistent with your transparency demonstration, then it's very easy to lose. One important facet of this is there's no perfection. You've just got to stay resilient and consistent. Infallibility is not the key. Through demonstrating transparency, you're going to gain management support. And once you have management support, you as an operator of a team or a developer on a team are given more autonomy to enact key principles from DevOps, SRE, chaos engineering. I mean, I've mentioned this before, but it's really build it as though you're going to operate it. You're going to be given the opportunity to bridge enterprise organizations with modern development architectures, methodologies, and practices. The only way to do that is to gain that management support and trust. Again, shared pain and being willing to demonstrate that you will feel that pain is key to achieving this formula. So a little more about how my data platforms team is actually exercising some of our chaos engineering practices and principles. We have a very tight, deep data pipeline integration. Our data pipeline has the most aggressive SLOs of any of my teams currently. Some of that is through maturity. It's one of my oldest teams. So we've been ever present, going up and up with our drive to very assertive SLAs. This current year is targeted at 99.9. As you can see, I mean, we are close. We are there. I say close because I feel like we're never really done. I mean, 100% month to date. I took that screenshot 2 weeks ago. We're still at 100%. So running at 100% month to month is really the goal. And the only way to do that is to learn from outages and expose gaps, no matter how small. Use those outages as templates and retest those gaps every single time you do a change to your system. Stress the whole system. And the way to really do that is attack individual pieces of it. Challenge your architectures, even when they're not your own. We run a lot of enterprise distributed data storage and processing services. Many are provided by a cloud provider. So they're managed services, and then many other open source services that are enterprise supported. Don't just inherently assume that those are resilient. You can do more by testing those assumptions. And we actually enjoy doing that very much. So some of the side effects, in addition to enjoyment of breaking things on purpose, is you're going to, and we've seen monitoring improvements every single time we run an attack. Well, maybe 99% of the time. Tends to be one of the primary side effects because monitoring is something that needs to be developed and iterated and matured as much as your software itself. We also obtain architecture design input, particularly that when it reflects back on an infrastructure. We've noticed kind of a weak link or one that is not quite behaving as we expected. From our pie chart there, you see black hole testing is by far the most entertaining and has revealed the most issues for us. So we continue to run it day in and day out. Some of the examples of, an example of a change that we have inherited was a Redis change. We went from multiple clusters, enriching in real time across several pipelines, to ultimately creating a separation of executors and clearing cache regularly. This was just something that was assumed would be done as part of TTL. Turned out not to be as quite the case. Last point, we've added over 100 metrics in the last 2 months and 10 monitors, plus countless run books, or we call them MOPs, or method of procedure changes. And these are key to smooth operations. And smooth does not necessarily mean that we are infallible. Again, it just means we detect issues quickly, and we can react even quicker. So as your team may grow through success or otherwise, scaling culture, very, very challenging. So while my perspective is on scaling a culture within an enterprise, I think that these commonalities are across any sort of engineering team that may experience growth. In my case, we had 90 new people join in essentially a day. Now, the keys for that, preserving core values, very hard. So what we did as a management team is take time for proper onboarding and treat new people like people. Respect their history. Do not assume that because you happen to be in the inheriting group and your culture gets to kind of be the majority that you're doing it right, that you're better. It's very important to exercise empathy and continuously express the core values important to your culture. There will be conflicts. There will be differences in defaults, standards of operating. Just be flexible. Be empathetic. So again, circumstances vary wildly. Just stick to your principles. I personally have been told some of my best advice was own your style. Just be very cognizant of what has worked well, but don't be rigid. Avoid a cultural playbook. Make small changes very frequently. Establish kind of a common set of questions, but don't stick to them like a script. Be very attentive to warning signals. Squeaky wheels can be very toxic to a culture. Introduce those new ideas gradually and champion better ways to work. If you happen to be bringing on people who don't have a strong sense of DevOps, SRE, chaos engineering, introduce them to it. It's actually an easy sell for most engineers. They understand the benefits mostly, almost immediately. They can relate and maybe even empathize because of the past pain. So just be there to reinforce those concepts and also provide kind of new ideas around measurement if it doesn't exist as strongly as it ought to. The only way to really have a culture that you can assess as working is through measurement. And quantification is extremely difficult. We often rely on qualification for quality of culture, but I would say that quantification is just as important, especially as you move up the executive chain or people reflect on performance in past years of particular teams. They're looking at data. They're looking at hard facts. So you need to measure. So on the docket for data platforms, really, we need to continue to iterate, adopt more versatile infrastructures, embrace the ability to experiment, which has been mentioned several times at this conference, is chaos engineering. It's really experimentation for developers. It's just testing failure as an experiment, learning from it, developing from it, building new ideas of how to monitor applications or maybe even new pathways for a function. Increasing your release safety is key to actually enabling that experimentation. I'm not just talking about like A and B testing. You need a framework that supports experimentation. A couple examples that we've leveraged, Istio and Apogee. You need multiple prod version pathways for resiliency. And that's a fancy way, I suppose, of saying, you need redundancy. Releases, always being pressured to release more often. And in order to really do that and pull together all the concepts I've mentioned and many of the other speakers have mentioned, you've got to institutionalize operational tooling and procedures and really allow the organization to trust your process for transformation of their core business. Observability, we have a long way to go. There's so many areas that could expose more insight around what is happening in our services. We run a very complex set. Well, one of my teams runs a very complex set of service mesh applications, and the interactions between those services, as well as the upstream and downstream, are mind-boggling. And without proper observability that actually captures tracing and logs in a comprehensive way, then ops in a production environment, particularly by another team, is going to take a very long time. Resiliency is very difficult to achieve because your releases look different, because your environments look different. So focusing on consistency and driving that towards a better observability is where we need to move more and more toward. And I don't think this is something that's ever truly done. And finally, and really part of the others, this is maturing a chaos engineering practice. Automated. We need to automate every single test that we do as part of our development cycle. We love game days, they're fun, but really automatic chaos tests as part of the build process is what a mature organization that is able to do that should be doing. Go beyond host attacks. Specifically, we're very fond of attacking particular servers or containers, but there are many tools that allow you to integrate directly into apps to intervene and interrupt some service to service or even functional processing. And I think that about summarizes everything I'd like to say today. Any questions, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.